Kia ora everybody, this is our continuation. This is workshop 2 of 4 of our annual plan 26-27. This one is on our public transport core service, which is we've got Giles, Stuart and Jesse at the end of the table. So we'll pass it over to you, take it as you want to do it. You can ask questions throughout the presentation, or do you want to run it right through?
We'll take questions during the presentation. I think it's probably
Awesome.
I've got a couple of hours for this. So just for a bit of context, this is the third of the 3 core services. Yeah. This is the area where we are proposing that there will be more changes than maybe the others, driven by for a number of reasons. And we'll want to spend the next couple of hours talking you through some context in terms of public transport, particularly for the new councillors, and then also the changes that we are proposing to include for the annual plan for 26-27. But I'm going to hand over to Stuart and Jesse to talk you through the content.
Kia ora koutou. Just for those who don't know me, my name is Stuart Gibbon. I'm the General Manager for Public Transport for Environment Canterbury. Thanks for having us today. So we're going to go through a bit of a high-level summary of public transport as a core service for Environment Canterbury to give you some context that feeds into the conversation around the funding and the annual plan process. Then we'll talk about some elements of the funding options that are available in the annual plan for year 3, some choices that are available to council and some rationale for those choices. And then we'll finish up with opportunities for more questions at the end. As Giles mentioned, we're happy to take questions as we go. As the name implies, this core service is focused on the delivery of public transport, predominantly bus and ferry services in the Greater Christchurch and Timaru urban centres, but we also provide a range of community-based services across the region as well, total mobility and community vehicle trusts. In the Greater Christchurch space, we have a number of scheduled urban bus services servicing Waimakariri, Selwyn and Christchurch City. They are augmented by a number of specific urban school services, so that is different to the Ministry of Education school network that operates across the region. So just a slight difference there. And of course we have our fabulous ferry service in Whakaraupo, Littleton Harbour, which we're very proud of. In the last 12 months, we carried just over 15 million passengers, which was a post-earthquake record for us, which was great. In Timaru, we have the world-famous in New Zealand service My Way on Demand. I say that with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but it is world-famous in that it's a highly successful on-demand service that fully replaced a scheduled bus service in Timaru, and that is used as an exemplar around the world for other on-demand considerations. We have 3 scheduled school services in Timaru. Timaru is the first smaller urban centre to have a double-decker bus, and that creates great joy for the children in Timaru. They like to ride on the upper deck and pretend they're driving the bus. Not just the children, sure, okay, so some of the adults. So we're very pleased to be able to have that vehicle down there to help with the demand for school services in Timaru. We also run a service from Temuka to Timaru, and last year 264,000 passenger trips. And since we've done those changes down there, we started our trial of My Way approximately 5 years ago. We've seen progressive and continued growth in engagement with public transport, which is a great outcome. I mentioned the total mobility and community vehicle trusts. These are really, really important components of the public transport ecosystem for our for our community. Total Mobility is a national program funded by both central government and ourselves, and it's intended to provide alternative transport choices for those folk who are transport disadvantaged who can't use public transport for any number of reasons. And so it enables them to continue to actively participate in their community and in society by giving them access to all of the amenities and services and opportunities that the rest of the community has through public transport and other transport services. And you can see up there where they operate in Canterbury. The community vehicle trusts are, their genesis was in Canterbury over 20 years ago. As you can see, we have 17 community vehicle trusts in Waitaha, Canterbury. They are salt-of-the-earth people, independent organisations that run as registered trusts. They are based on volunteers from the community who manage the procurement and operation of small vehicles, volunteers who drive those vehicles to enable members of their community, again, to access their community and social services in the smaller rural areas of our region. So we have 17. There are approximately 5 to 6 other trusts around the country. So the dominant use is here in Canterbury, and that's driven by Canterbury Regional Council actively promoting and engaging this opportunity with our rural communities.
I've got a question from Sarah.
Thank you. I think it's more of a comment, but people with gold cards often get on buses without checking in. So I'm sort of thinking your record number actually might be higher than it's recorded.
Yes, so at the moment when a gold card customer rides our service, they present the gold card rather than tapping on, and the driver records that boarding on the driver's console. So we do capture a significant proportion, but I would imagine on occasion the driver might forget to push the button, and so you could argue that our numbers are slightly under-reported, which is better than being over-reported. Yes. When we fully implement national ticketing, that option won't be available anymore, and so Super Gold customers will need to register one of their payment token options, their phone or their debit or credit card, and tap on and off like everyone else. And so we will have more accurate information from that process.
I have a question from Councillor Davis and then Councillor Mackay.
Question on, I've had feedback from people in wheelchairs here in the city, and to get the total mobility, apparently you have to wait till midday and then quickly book one. And apparently it's really hard to get a booking. This guy was saying it took him like 3 days to get a booking for an appointment. Anyway, so that's a shortage. But so when the community vehicle trusts buy these vans, is there a wheelchair? Do you make sure that they have wheelchair capabilities?
So it's important to understand the distinction between total mobility and community vehicle trusts. Total mobility is a fully integrated service component of government-funded public transport in Aotearoa. And so there are standards required for our fixed service bus delivery and total mobility to include wheelchair accessibility. That is not the case for community vehicle trusts. So community vehicle trusts have the ability to choose which vehicles they procure and use based on the funding they have available and the demand from their community. Some trusts do have wheelchair accessible vehicles, most certainly, but not necessarily all.
Councillor Mackay.
Just a reminder, really. Are we going to split out the Waimakariri Community Vehicle Trust lines in this annual plan that's going through?
Might seek some more clarity on what you're looking for there, Claire.
Your microphone, Councillor.
Sorry. You might not have been here, Stuart, last year. Sonia's waving her hand. She understands it because she was here. You got my question, Sonia?
Thank you. So just to provide a little bit of context, the Community Vehicle Trust at the moment is not separated as a line item in the finance policy. What we're looking to do is do that. It won't be in this annual plan, but we'll try and separate it out for the long-term plan because it's going through a full finance policy review. So that's on the list.
Cool. Did I have Councillor Moody? Yeah, and then Councillor Robinson, and then we'll try and move on.
Thank you. Total mobility subsidised taxi services for eligible customers. So that's funded by partially us and partially central government. Is that correct? Just a nod, yes or yep. Yeah, I thought it. Yep. So thanks. And so I understand that this one has had a reduction in the funding from central government, and therefore I'm concerned that these very vulnerable people who can't get around any other way may struggle to get where they need to go. Can you give me some information on that, please?
Sure. I'm not aware of any reduction in funding at this stage. What happened with total mobility at the tail end of COVID was additional funding was allocated through government to reduce the subsidy required or the contribution required by the customer. So at the moment, total mobility is subsidised up to 75% of the cost of the trip, whereas prior to that, the customer would pay 50% of the cost, whereas now they only pay 25% of the cost. So that's been, we've seen significant uptake in usage of and consumption of public transport, which has also driven our cost footprint because we contribute to the cost of running total mobility as well. At the moment, the central government is doing a review on the total mobility system as a whole, including how it's funded. So we would expect to be receiving some information from them very soon as to what their proposals are for potential change.
Thank you. So I am on the right track here. So just to flag for council that central government is proposing to reduce their contribution for total mobility from 75% to 50%. And that will mean that for the person getting on the taxi, because they're only paying a percentage, what they pay is actually set to double. So from 10 to 20 bucks. I can break it down another time, but it's not for now because this is a briefing, but just to get it on our radar that some of our most vulnerable people who can least afford or have a way to make any more money because they're very disabled are going to be facing a doubling of their transport costs. And if this proposal from government lands, and we are in a position potentially, to see if that's something that we care about and would like to help or not when we look at our financial planning for the coming financial year.
Councillor Robinson.
My question, just going back to the My Way, having driven a lot between Dunedin and Christchurch, every time I go through Timaru, I just see a raft of vehicles, My Way vehicles, and there's heaps of them. However, you say that there's a lot of demand for them, and I'm wondering how many are in current rotation, and is it meeting the demand?
So at the moment there are 10 vehicles in service in Timaru, and not all 10 vehicles are on the road simultaneously. So at our peak time in the morning, most of the vehicles are on the road, and then during the day, some of those vehicles come off the road and are stabled for a period of time, and then in the evening peak, we maximise our vehicles. In the weekends, there are less vehicles operating as well. So it's really driven by peak demand. At the peak times, what we need to recognise is on-demand is not a taxi. It is not a door-to-door service. It is not a one-to-one service. It is a ride-share public transport model. And what that means is we need to optimise and aggregate rides on that service and balance that with expectations of availability and trip journey time. So what I mean by that is if you take a taxi and you book a taxi, it'll turn up at 10 o'clock when you want it to, and it'll take you directly to your destination and drop you at the door with no deviations. Whereas with on-demand, because it is a shared service, it will be considering bookings from other customers around the urban centre and will deviate its route to collect in an efficient way. And it will drop you close to your destination. So in our vernacular, the My Way On Demand service is a corner-to-corner model, and we've done that deliberately so that we don't compromise the taxi service that needs to continue to exist in Timaru for all sorts of other reasons, and we also differentiate it as a public transport service and make it more cost effective.
Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Lamont.
Thank you. A couple of questions. What engagement did you have with the community in Timaru when it was launched, and how has the subsequent uptake been in the mood of the community? And then I have a follow-on.
Look, it's fair to say there was a lot of nervousness in Timaru when we first mooted the idea of replacing a fixed route service with the on-demand model. The reason that we went down this road is that the fixed route service was seeing continuing declining patronage, and it just wasn't economic to run. So the choices were no PT or a different approach. And so we chose Timaru as a really good opportunity to test this model. We spent a lot of time engaging with community groups and community at large. And in fact, we used the community to help co-design how the My Way service would function in Timaru. We even ran a competition to name it, which was very, very popular. The community, the demographics of the community that were quite concerned about it were those that were used to using a timetable service and were challenged by using technology to do their bookings. And so part of our engagement with the community enabled us to stand up a call centre service. So if you weren't comfortable using your phone and app to book like you do with an Uber, then you could ring the call centre and book. And when you rang the call centre, you could also request that you had a wheelchair vehicle, etc. So that allayed a lot of the fears and concerns in that community. And as I said, what we've seen is significant growth in the engagement with public transport down there since we've implemented.
Sorry, can I just
Yes.
supplementary? Based on what you've just said, what modelling have you done to look at the feasibility of scaling it?
Yes, good question. So if we think about what the future of public transport might look like in Greater Christchurch, on-demand has been on our radar since 2019 when we finalised the Public Transport Futures investment plans, and they were endorsed and adopted by the Greater Christchurch Partnership back then. And so we anticipated that on-demand or something like on-demand would have a feature and a role to play in Greater Christchurch as our urban footprint grows and the demand for transport access grows. And we would need to, in the future, balance the economics of running big buses down urban streets versus smaller, more agile vehicles in our neighbourhoods. So we have been doing a lot of thinking about that. Our intention was to bring a model of on-demand to trial in Christchurch, Greater Christchurch, in this LTP. However, that didn't receive funding support from NZTA, so we haven't done that yet. With a number of other changes that have occurred in this funding round with government, in particular a focus on private revenue increase and optimisation of our existing fleet and asset base, we are starting to think about how we, using that optimisation word, how we manage this challenge between the funding and costs and impacts of running big vehicles around our community and the service level that provides versus running a more agile-based secondary service that augments and supports that. So there is thinking going on in that space, but we don't yet have the funding to execute that.
Now we've got Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll get to my question, but can I just make a comment about My Way compared to a scheduled service? The more scheduled service is used, the cheaper it becomes. The more My Way is used, the more expensive it becomes. So that's something to just keep in the back of mind. I wanted to go back to old age pensioners and using the buses. You said that to get a free bus ride with the new ticketing system, you have to register or something, did you? Can you just explain what that process is and why you can't just flash the card? I've had this for a very long time. I've never used it on I have used it on a bus in Wellington, but...
Dear God. I didn't know you were that old, Ian.
Okay, I'll let me just think about that for a minute, Councillor Mackenzie, so I'll make sure I don't put my foot in my mouth. So with national ticketing, there is a focus and indeed a sort of a drive from central government to, as much as is practicable to do so, standardise customer experience on public transport across the motu. And also to ensure that we can collect as accurate information as we can on the utilisation of public transport and the demographic of those who use it. So, for example, in Auckland today, Super Gold customers need to have an AT Hop card and they register for a concession, the Super Gold concession, and they tap on and tap off. So in Auckland, you can't use your Super Gold card to get on and off the bus. You have to tap on and off. And so that same philosophy and model has been embedded into the national ticketing program. And so when we fully implement national ticketing, circa mid next year, we will turn off the in-it ticketing system. We will enable full concession registration across all the concessions that are available across the country and including Greater Christchurch. And we will be doing quite a significant sort of engagement campaign to communicate with, support and enable our Super Gold customers to manage that transition. And so they will have two choices. They will be able to register their existing credit or debit card for a Super Gold concession, which will enable them to access the free times of public transport, or they will be able to access a national transit card or Motu Move card and register their concession against that. So if you don't want to use your credit card, you don't have to, but you do have to have a token that is registered. Yes, that's correct. So if we think about the other regional councils that are running the B card across Aotearoa at the moment, they have gone through this process of encouraging Super Gold customers to register their B cards for a concession so they can better capture ridership. So this process and change has been occurring progressively across the Motu over the last few years already.
Okay, we can carry on.
Okay. I'll pass over to Jesse just to talk a little bit about the ecosystem within which we work, because that's important to understand the various components, influences and levers that we have in this portfolio.
Good morning, councillors. Just putting on my different hat today, wearing my Regional Transport and Urban Development Strategy hat. So just quickly run you through, as Stuart said, the ecosystem around transport and with a particular focus on public transport. So we've tried to articulate here at a national level, you've got the Ministry of Transport, who develops and executes the government strategy around transport and provides that direction. They develop the government policy statement on land transport, and that sets out what the government's trying to achieve and how they'll allocate the national land transport funding. NZTA at a national level has multiple roles. So they are the funder, the investor. They also do that in line with the government policy statement and how that money is to be allocated. They also, in the context of PT, oversee the whole planning, operation, execution, and delivery of PT across the country. They also run our state highways, so they have another hat that they wear. So you just complicated space with NZTA that they wear multiple hats for different purposes. So just bear that in mind. In the context of PT, they also issue guidelines that we follow around how we run our public transport services, and also particularly around procurement of transport services through our providers. At a regional level, if you jump down, we, as a regional council, we have two functions as well. We develop the regional land transport plan for the Canterbury region. So that looks at the roading controlling authority, that's the TAs, our councils. So all of the work that they do in terms of maintaining the infrastructure. With a PT focus, it's bus stops, bus lanes, real-time information, those type of things. But they also do all the road maintenance and those aspects. For us as a public transport authority, obviously running our public transport services, and then in the regional land transport plan, NZTA with the state highway investment program. With the regional public transport plan, which sits alongside, these are two statutory documents. We developed that, both of those documents in line with the LTMA, which is the Land Transport Management Act. And we do that in consultation with our communities. And we've just recently been through the regional public transport plan process. So we have a plan from 2025 through to 2035. This helps us to design the PT network, procure our fund our PT services, and also in terms of the sub-regional focus of Greater Christchurch, we have the Greater Christchurch Partnership, who's been instrumental in integrating land use and transport here in Greater Christchurch. So, but PT extends beyond Greater Christchurch, as we just talked about, to Timaru and the other functions that we have around total mobility, community vehicle trusts, etc. So, but if we focus in on Greater Christchurch for a second, Taflin, I think, briefed you yesterday on some of the strategic relationships we have. So that's a coalition of local councils, so Environment Canterbury, Canterbury Regional Council, Christchurch City, Selwyn and Waimakariri District Councils, alongside Mana Whenua, the Te Whara Ora, and also NZTA as a non-voting member around the table. We have just recently, last year, been through the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan development as the future development strategy for Greater Christchurch. It's a 30-year long-term strategy for the sub-region. And that integrated the land use and transport. So you would have heard in the media around mass rapid transit and our investment in the public transport core routes and the rest of network as part of the precursor to delivery of a mass rapid transit system into the future. And that's also contained within what we call the Greater Christchurch Transport Plan, which gives effect to the transport aspects of the spatial plan more broadly. So thinking about integrating land use and transport with a focus on intensification along our PT corridors and around our key centres, Papanui, Riccarton, Central City, etc. So that's the kind of sub-regional context, if you like, and how the partnership works together. Aiming to bring you a more comprehensive briefing on the GCP. And also the work of the Regional Transport Committee as well, so that early next year, so we can give a bit more detail around all of the work that we've done up until now. So yeah, that sort of sets the sub-regional context. And then at a local community board level, we also have advocates for our community around things like bus stops in particular, and how our infrastructure will service and meet the needs of our local communities. And then you get down into the operational aspects where we have our operators who we procure services from, who run the workforce for the PT services that we provide and operate the vehicles and vessels, the ferries, etc., as well as also the other infrastructure that supports that. So that's a bit of a contextual layout of the transport system. It's quite complicated, many different roles and functions within that. But yeah, in the context of PT, that's how we develop our public transport plans to give effect to that strategic direction.
Andrew?
How do you adapt to, so the National Land Transport Fund, every 3 years it kind of changes depending on who's in government. So how do you adapt to that, the change of funding?
That's a very good point. That's one of the biggest challenges, and hence why we're talking about this in the annual plan today as well, just in terms of what we've put forward as projects to improve our public transport network, what may get funded locally versus what gets funded nationally. The government policy statement at the top there is the most important thing that directs where the money is going to go. So as we've seen with the change in government, we saw a shift from public transport active modes to more road maintenance state highways, investment in roads of national significance. We've got a finite funding pool, if you like. So this is where we've got to at this stage. Is we had an ambitious program of public transport investment, but when the partner funding, and I think Giles mentioned yesterday, we have about a 50-50 type relationship with NZTA around the funding to deliver these infrastructure and service improvements. If that funding's not there, we then need to be able to cut our cloth, if you like, to suit. So you start to see some of those. We need to adjust how we deliver our program over time, suitable to the available funding. But we've got an opportunity coming up with the next government policy statement on land transport coming up in April to put our best foot forward for public transport in particular and what we want to see there. And that gives effect to that strategic direction for the sub-region and how we will grow and change over time. So just sort of this kind of reiterates what I've just said. So just to try and articulate this in a wiring diagram as to how it all fits together. So you've got as I said, the GPS and the National Land Transport Program down into the Regional Land Transport Plan, which is where we collate all of our bids for funding, if you like. And we have our Environment Canterbury's long-term plan, public transport plan, and then all of the strategic kind of planning work that we've done there with the spatial plan, transport plan, and the public transport futures program, which is our core and rest of network investment alongside mass rapid transit, as well as the subsequent investment. And then you get down into our delivery of services and infrastructure. And as Stuart said before, we've got fixed route services, on-demand services, total mobility, and our community vehicle trusts.
Just one question I have. If you remove regional councils out of this equation, it's not going to get that much simpler, is it? Under the current national system that we've got. I think we just need to keep reminding ourselves of that we're part of a system.
Yes.
Oh, I've started. Councillor Faulkner.
Can you talk to that a little bit more? Because I was looking at that and I was thinking about how could that be simplified, and then you put a problem in front of me.
Good on you.
Perhaps I can have a go at that. So with the exception of the Canterbury Regional Council components on here, all of these other activities still need to occur in the transport ecosystem, and in particular the public transport ecosystem. So the Land Transport Management Act is very prescriptive on how public transport is governed, how it is planned, how investment is made, and how delivery is managed across both nationally, regionally, and at an urban centre layer as well. So all those activities, unless the Land Transport Management Act changes, would still need to be owned by someone, be governed by someone, be delivered by someone, and coordinated in some fashion.
Did I have another question from Councillor Gerard?
Is there any scope in this to work inter-regionally, like with the West Coast and Otago, and how does that work?
So we do, in a regional land transport sense, with the regional land transport plans, we have so the Regional Transport Committee, which I think I mentioned last time I spoke to Council as well. The Regional Transport Committee has delegated the role to develop the Regional Land Transport Plan. We approve it as a council, as a statutory function, but it's developed by the Regional Transport Committee. Chair Swiggs and Councillor Davies are going to be our representatives on the Regional Transport Committee. And we quarterly have done up until now, met as a South Island Regional Transport Committee chairs group. So the chairs and deputies of each of the councils of the Regional Transport Committee, come together quarterly to talk about some of the challenges that are facing the South Island from a transport perspective, and particularly things like resilience of our network, freight movement, but particularly also better travel options. So there's an opportunity for discussions about inter-regional transport at that level. It is a very connected group in terms of the understanding the transport needs of the South Island and advocating to government for greater funding into what we want to try and achieve for our transport and for our communities. So.
I'll go back to Councillor. Sorry, did you want to have another one?
Just so that's that middle box, the third one down.
It's not on there.
It's not on there, but it's we're sort of focusing more in that we're sort of getting into the South Island level, but just at the second level down, the Canterbury Regional Land Transport Plan is one of a number of regional land transport plans across the South Island, and we have a joint statement actually in each of the transport plans that connects each of the regions in its transport aspirations. So that's where those discussions happen, is at that South Island level. Sorry. But yeah, as I said, I'm happy to bring back a bit more of a comprehensive, broader regional transport briefing to council, looking at the Greater Christchurch regional and sort of South Island level discussions, if you like, early next year. So.
Councillor Faulkner, and then we'll go Councillor Mackenzie and then Councillor Robinson.
Supplementary to my previous question, if that act is so prescriptive, is there indications that that's going to be reviewed and restructured or redone? Because I'm just thinking.
Yeah, I've had no indications of that to date, that's going to be reviewed or changed. No.
There's no reform going in that space yet.
So my question, my question or question is a follow-up to Councillor Littlejohn's questions. But if you've got 6 boxes there involving planning, and all those involve multiple agencies, then in fact there is scope for rationalisation of some of the process, regardless of whether the Act changes or not, isn't it? So the answer to our Chair's initial question is, if the regional council's role is taken over by some other entity, then actually there is potential for some efficiencies in planning anyway.
Just as a piece of context, I think that all parties involved in this interesting diagram recognise that it probably doesn't work in the optimal way, not just in terms of the timing of the planning. So one of the challenges we face is that we have to produce our LTP and include our money before NZTA makes its announcements. So if we don't have anything in, we definitely won't get funding. If we do put something in, we still may not get funding, which leaves us with funding that is not matched, which is why we will see some of the changes that we're proposing to make. Other things that are currently being talked about that have been signalled by government or officials is things like trying to move more to 10-year planning with commitment to funding, but that then cuts across political decision-making every 3 years about wanting to shift. So how do you balance long-term certainty of funding with governments deciding they want to reprioritise other activity? Also, some talk about at the regional land transport plan is giving greater discretion to the region to decide where the money goes, rather than everything being subject to individual decisions. So there are things that are being talked about that potentially could make the system run more smoothly, but no fundamental legislative change is currently being talked about.
Councillor Robinson.
As a past user of inter-regional rail, with my thermos of tomato soup when I was about 17, I am very interested in the potential for relooking at inter-regional rail. And my question probably is of you, Jessie, with regards to that, the committee and that regional look into different options for interregional. is there any discussions within that sort of group on the sort of greater journeys that they've been doing a lot of trials interregionally between Dunedin and Christchurch in particular, and the potential for that sort of the use of that model or even their services for more public benefit rather than private? It seems slightly out of scope, but it's not really, because I've seen the potential of it, and there's a lot of desire from the public to look at something similar. Sorry.
Apologies. So stepping back about 3 years or so ago, the Regional Transport Committee asked us to look at regional rail, and we provided some advice to the Regional Transport Committee at the time, informed by WSP as a consultant who provided us strategic rail advice around how to approach the business case process and step our way through looking into those opportunities. The advice we provided at the time was around putting funding into the LTP, which we did, which was $525,000. It was originally in year 2 of our long-term plan, and that was to do the regional rail studies. So that was including a market demand study and a rail utilisation study to really start off the process of whether or not rail is a feasible proposition going forward. So, and obviously in all of our public transport services, having the 51% funding share from NZTA is critical to running any public transport service. So following the strategic business case process, the initial work that we would do would be to look at what is the market demand, how is the rail utilised at the moment for freight, what are the opportunities there, what are the constraints, etc., and step our way through that. Part of the annual plan processes, funding shifted from year 2 to year 4. It's still available at this stage in year 4 for doing that work, and that was at the request of council to look at how we could reduce rates at the time. So we're more than happy to do whatever work is directed of us. But in terms of actually looking at the studies the services that are being provided, no, we haven't at this stage, because we just haven't had the funding to do the work at this point in time. The Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan and Mass Rapid Transit work did look at heavy rail as an option in the Greater Christchurch area, and didn't proceed with that option. It preferred the street running 22 stop route for Mass Rapid Transit, rather than the heavy rail option. It didn't, various reasons, cost one of them. It doesn't necessarily take people where they need to go on the heavy rail system. There would be connections into the central city and other things. So there are aspects to it that are absolutely positive. There's other aspects that were challenging in that as well. So, but that's where the Mass Rapid Transit business case got to in a nutshell. And the Greater Christchurch Partnership, which this council endorsed as well, the MRT business case and spatial plan direction, proceeded with that street running corridor. So it's not an option it's an option into the future, but it's not one that we were pursuing just at this point in time.
We'll carry on. Oh, sorry, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Oh.
Okay, now we're getting to the specific funding details, a conversation around public transport for Environment Canterbury. We're going to cover off some context around the shape of the funding, how that looks at the moment, where it comes from, and what are the influences on that. And then we'll dive into a little bit more detail for the annual plan considerations. So at the moment, public transport, as you see on the slide, represents circa 47% of council's budget. And the large proportional majority of that is focused on the planning and delivery of public transport services in Greater Christchurch and Timaru. We get our funding from targeted rates, which is set through council, and targeted rates are placed upon those households that benefit from the service that we provide. So that's an important nuance for public transport. So not all of Canterbury ratepayers contribute to public transport. So we have some specific ring-fenced areas that contribute for services that are available and accessible to those areas. We then get match funding from Wakakotahi New Zealand Transport Agency, and they also provide specific additional funding for targeted activities such as Super Gold funding, Community Services Card funding, and in the past, government has set up some ring-fenced buckets of funding that we can apply for. SURF funding, Climate Emergency Response Fund was an example where we accessed funding out of there for some of our fleet transition to zero emissions. And then the third primary source, obviously, is user fees to round out the supply of income or revenue for public transport. In this current central government triennium, some new concepts were introduced that have a material impact on not only the funding arrangements for public transport, but also what public transport authorities need to focus their time and investment in. And the first one of those, as you'll note up there in the middle there, is the private revenue ratio construct, whereby government is seeking to influence a greater share of funding coming from third-party sources, and by that we mean not public money. So we are required to measure the relationship between public funding or subsidy versus private funding, and ideally grow the level of private funding and reduce the level of public funding over time. And that's what the private revenue ratio measures. And council, all public transport authorities were required to identify, adopt and commit to delivering some targets over the next 3 years, which council did earlier this year. And why that's important is because it materially influences how we prioritise what we do, both in terms of the service we deliver and the funding we invest in public transport outcomes. Obviously, the more funding, the more public money that goes into delivery of public transport, the private revenue potentially reduces unless that investment stimulates more private income. You'll see on the right-hand side in the middle there our ratios that were approved were 13% for this fiscal year, 14% for next fiscal year, year 3. They are relatively low compared to some other regions around the country. And the reason they're relatively low is we have been running a flat fare trial for a number of years through the post-COVID area with the intention of stimulating a re-engagement with public transport post-COVID. And as you will have seen in the patronage numbers, that's been very, very successful in driving more engagement and more ridership of our service. And council have subsequently made decisions to increase the rate of fares, and that's directly related to driving this private revenue outcome. And then lastly, we have a ring-fenced public transport reserve fund, which is all local funding. And that is there as a self-insurance policy first and foremost. It is intended to protect us from fiscal shock, such as COVID, earthquakes, operators going out of business and various other things that come our way from time to time. So its primary focus is self-insurance for fiscal shock. It has a minimum threshold of $5 million, and that gets reviewed on a regular basis to take account of inflation, etc. And then it gets topped up where we underspend in a year. There are the surplus rates that we have collected that are targeted go into the public transport reserves fund, or council can choose to directly rate to top up the reserve if the conditions require it. I'll just stop there for any questions.
Councillor Campbell.
Can I just check that my interpretation of what you just said about how the private revenue ratio affects how you decide what you do is correct? My interpretation of that is that you need to focus more on areas of high demand where you'll get more passengers, more paying passengers, and focus less on areas that may not have high demand but have great social need. Is that a correct interpretation?
I think that's a very good summary of the tensions and trade-offs that public transport authorities around the country have to consider. Both before private revenue came into existence, but even more so now, where we are tasked with driving, and the GPS, it specifically says that we need to drive more patronage, and it specifically says that we need to drive increases in private revenue. And so, as you've articulated, the obvious place to go is where there is high density population or over demand, because that will generate more ridership at a concentrated level. Councillor McKenzie made a really good point just earlier on around public transport bus fixed route networks as we run in Greater Christchurch are effectively a fixed cost model. So the more bums you have on the seats, the more private revenue you make for the dollar you've spent. So yes, that's really the key purpose of the GPS, is to focus us and get our minds focused on driving more engagement with public transport versus driving more social connectivity.
Can I just ask something coming from that, which is is there kind of a snowballing effect where if you have a good service and put on more buses, you increase demand even further, which leads to more buses, which leads to increased demand, and the opposite side of that is that in areas where there's not good service, demand drops away and goes in the opposite direction. Yeah.
You should be a public transport planner. That's really useful. No, you've summed that up very well. But one of the interesting things about public transport that we know from our community's feedback over many years, and you'll be hearing a bit more about this in the new year, the two things that our community continually and consistently tell us they want is reliability of a service and frequency of a service. And we know when we look across our network that we have a three-tier level of service. We have our core routes that run, our intention is to get them to run at 10-minute frequency during the day, and we've been fortunate to be able to do that on some of our routes so far. Then we have our connector services, which run between 20 and 30-minute frequencies. They are well used. And then we have our sort of local services, which are very low frequency, typically an hour. And when we look at those three levels of service, it's clearly obvious that frequency is the key determinant of use. The lower the frequency, the less engagement. So yes, we could continue to invest and focus our efforts solely on our core routes to get their frequencies higher and higher. That will generate more demand and require more capacity. But equally, we can look at our connector services, those half-hour frequencies, and say, well, there is growth in certain parts of our city that are serviced by those routes now. Perhaps we should upgrade those to a more attractive frequency, because there is intensification and a volume of people on that route that could turn it into a core route. The other component that's important is where the route goes. So with fixed route services, they need to take you somewhere that is of high value. So the central business district, core activity centres such as Riccarton, Parikiori, things like that, Addington, where there is a concentration of activity, because that is a very important component of a successful PT service. So there is opportunity to expand the amenity of our network beyond just the 5 core routes that we have, by pulling that frequency lever and aligning that with the growth we see in our urban footprint. And Jesse mentioned the spatial plan. That spatial plan identifies what's called key priority areas for development and intensification, and government is particularly interested in seeing transport investment align with those key priority development areas, and that is to drive patronage and ridership and private revenue outcomes, while also delivering the social connectivity and economic agglomeration outcomes that a concentration of that service would deliver. Now, both of those things obviously don't necessarily answer the question that you've posed around just fundamentally basic access for the wider community. And I think that's one of the perennial challenges that public transport authorities have, is there is simply not enough money to be all things to all people. And what that means is there will be casualties. There will be some folk in our community who won't be able to access a fixed bus route, because we simply can't afford to balance the economics and the outcomes with the funding that's available. And so you are confronted as a council with very difficult choices around how you get value for the public investment you invest, both economic and social value, how you balance that, and to attract central government investment to enable the broader outcomes you're seeking. Yeah.
So I've got questions, got quite a few. So I've got, is your question been answered, Joe? So then we'll go to Claire, then Ian, and then Nettles.
Just with regard to the private revenue percentages and trying to meet them, we did have scheduled the zones coming back in February and an increase in fare recovery, which with the NTS just going live on adults at the moment and still some time in the future for us to be able to do the zones. Is there going to be, I would imagine there's going to be quite an impact here, because unless we go out for a consultation about increasing fares even more, which personally I think we probably, to be realistic, need to. Just what in the interim between that and a long-term plan discussion or something?
So a couple of good questions in there. If I just touch on the fares one first. So through the Regional Public Transport Plan that was adopted by Council in July this year, we spent quite a bit of time discussing and considering the private revenue implications for our communities. And Council made the decision to annually review fares going forward. So the next review opportunity for our fares will be in 2027 once we've finished a rollout of NTS. So there is intended to be an annual conversation around fares going forward. In terms of the zoning fares you've referred to, we had scheduled to implement those in February next year, and that would create 2 zones, restore Christchurch to 2 zones. So folk travelling from Waimakariri and Selwyn into the city would pay a higher fare. If you're an adult, that would be $4 versus the $3 currently now. However, as you've identified, the delays in the final deliveries of the NTS functions has meant we're not going to be able to implement our zone change in February. The good news is that NZTA Waka Kotahi have agreed to underwrite that revenue loss and provide us with funding so we are not disadvantaged fiscally from that delay. So that is a good outcome.
Ian?
My question sort of follows up. I don't think it replicates Claire's questions, but as part of that discussion about fare recovery, you identified, I think we've got one of the highest rates of subsidy from targeted ratepayers to bus users in New Zealand, and also some of the lowest bus fares. And your concern was in setting the new bus fares that we didn't want to chase away patronage because that would be counterproductive. But we have implemented some of the fare rises, haven't we? Have you seen the predicted drop-offs in patronage? Could you comment on that, please?
Sure, that's a very, very good question. So in this fiscal year, starting July 2025, on the 7th of July, we adjusted our fares from $2 flat fares to $3 flat fares for adults. We adjusted our child fares from $1 to $1.50, and we adjusted our youth concession from $1 to $2.50. Since that change has been made, year to date to the end of October, we are tracking 3% lower than the previous year in patronage. 3% lower. And that is predominantly driven by the youth demographic on our network, because their fare change was the most significant, from $1 to $2.50. However, what we are noting is that in October, patronage decline reduced. So if I were to draw a line, it's, instead of going like this, it's starting to taper off, which is a good indicator. We've also went live in early November with Motu Move, and we have seen quite a significant uptake in the use of credit card payments. So we expect to see that innovation contributing to a settling and perhaps a growth return for patronage. We also have Parikiori opening officially to the public on the 17th of December. That's recently been announced. And that facility, well, there's no other word to describe it, it's awesome. And 5 of our core routes service that facility. So we would expect to see a significant utilisation of our network to access that facility. And then, of course, finally, next year we have Te Kaha opening in April, which we expect to see a bump from that as well. So there are definitely opportunities to respond to the reduction that we've seen from our fare change. What's interesting to note with fare changes is 2 things happen. You get an increase in revenue, which helps our private revenue outcome, and potentially, and we have seen this in the first 3 months, a reduction in patronage. At some point in time, there is a tipping point where patronage can keep going down and revenue keeps going up, but at some point that stops and you start to lose revenue and patronage. So it really comes down to what it is you want to chase. Do you want to chase the money, or do you want to chase the patronage? Because at some point in time, you're going to come to this equilibrium point where both suffer.
Just a follow-up question, Stuart, because there was I think you predicted there'll be a loss of patronage. Is the 3% within the scope of your predictions, or is it greater or lesser?
It's less. It's less. Yes.
That's good. Who was next? Was it Nettles?
Thank you. Just to touch on something you were talking about before, and I'm specifically interested in those sort of lead lag indicators or the algorithms you use. Just trying to unpack the agility of the ability to look at population changes in housing and the work you do to anticipate that, rather than have the squeaky wheel saying we've got no services, and you know, the converse of that being the first cab off the rank, bus at the bus stop type thing.
Some great questions coming out today. I'm really enjoying this conversation. If we think about the work that the Greater Christchurch Partnership have done over the last 5 and a bit years now around PT Futures, that piece of work was specifically focused on planning for the future. I'm focused on modelling growth, where urban growth and where commercial growth would occur, how our population would grow and the demographics would change, and therefore where the demand would be and how we both shape the demand as a city from a planning perspective and shape the response from a transport perspective. So that was a really good piece of work. It considered all those things that you've just mentioned. The modelling process that folks that are far smarter than me have done, look at what has happened in the past to shape what happens in the future in terms of population growth, urban development across the country. And Statistics New Zealand provide us with a whole bunch of really interesting inputs to help us to model the future. So we've done that as a cohort in Greater Christchurch and put forward our investment case to demonstrate a progressive, managed expansion of our network. However, as we all know, that COVID kind of got in the way of us doing that, and then government priorities changed somewhat. So public transport continues to find itself in a lag model rather than a lead model. And when we think about private revenue as well, that is a lag approach, because if you don't have the demand, you're unlikely to get the revenue. So chasing demand is the thing here. So it's a challenging time for public transport authorities, including ourselves. And so how are we going to deal with that in the short term? The only way we can really approach that is to look at how we optimise what we have now, how we take the assets we currently have and how we get more juice out of those assets. And that drives some difficult choices and decisions, which you're going to hear about shortly, not today, in a couple of weeks' time, and then next year we'll be bringing some thoughts to you on that very, very point. With the spatial plan that Jesse talked about, one of the great things about that piece of work is that it clearly identifies the key priority areas for development. It clearly identifies where development needs to be concentrated and joins the transport conversation with the urban form conversation and brings it much closer. So our opportunity in the next funding round with the central government through our RLTP and our funding bids is to demonstrate that as a community of governors, you've got this, you've done this thinking, you've done this planning, you've got a solid foundational plan that's worth investing in. That's our intent anyway.
We'll carry on. Park your question, write it down. We'll get into the next. There's a bit of meaty stuff to get into. But you're getting these good questions because we've got a great council for the time being. So expect more good questions.
Okay, look, given time's running along, I'm not going to spend too much time on the next two slides. These really give you a sort of a historical concept of the journey we're on in terms of the planning of public transport, where we've come from and where we're wanting to get to. So post-earthquake, we had a very, very well-patronised network. 17.2 million trips per year was the record 18 months before the earthquakes. And then post the earthquakes, as we know, the main demand source for public transport was closed for 2 years, being the CBD, and then it's had quite a period of time of redevelopment and re-energisation. Public transport was rationalised and reduced to fit within the economics of the funding that was available, the demand for the service being somewhat subdued, and the roading network not being up to the task. And so employment was distributed and went and disaggregated, which is very difficult to service with fixed route public transport services. PT Futures was the planning mechanism to respond to that, to align that response and that investment with growth back in the CBD, because as a city we need a successful, vibrant central city. And so our network plans and our investment plans aligned with the spatial plan are all about concentrating demand for services and for transport to get the capacity and the outcomes from a social and an economic perspective that we need. And ultimately that will coalesce into the mass rapid transit corridor, which is a key priority area as well. So this comes into these three key bubbles at the top. Improve the foundations of our network, and that is focusing on our core routes. Improve the frequency, because that is where the majority of people use our services, and really crank those services up to drive more economic outcomes, to generate the funding to do the next tier, which is the rest of network, going out wider to our communities, increasing those frequencies, and then ultimately reaching more and more of our community and supporting mass rapid transit.
Councillor Gerard.
Yeah, I'm just with the mass rapid transport corridor. I'm just wondering whether there could be a corridor to the airport, because between Rolleston and Belfast, so it seems like you're having to take people into town and then they have to bus out to the airport. I mean, I just feel the airport hasn't been serviced.
So, stepping right back into the MRT business case, some time ago, there was consideration around the extension of MRT out to the airport through past the university as well. There's challenges around intensification along that corridor to get the density of development with the current airport noise contours as they stand within the planning framework that we have for the sub-region. So you can't essentially develop enough housing within that corridor to meet the necessary demand needed for a mass rapid transit system to run along that corridor out to the airport. So that's probably a longer term phase piece as we move through the planning process with considering the airport noise contours and what might happen there. Part of the rest of the network discussions as well, we'll need to consider those other aspects of how the broader parts of our community are connected. The MRT system only runs from, at this stage, as approved or as endorsed, runs from Hornby through to Belfast with direct bus connections out to Rolleston and also to Rangiora and Kaiboy.
If it's quick, because we really do need to start getting into the budget stuff, which is important for our annual plan discussion. There's a whole lot of time that I think we can get into designing all the merits of that. So we'll move on, I think, is probably best.
Okay, so as you've heard, we spend a reasonable sum of money, or invest a reasonable sum of money into public transport annually, and that funding and investment enables us to deliver a bunch of services to our community, which encompasses, at a really base level, a lot of buses, a lot of drivers, and depots infrastructure to support that ecosystem. Because our contract arrangements through the Land Transport Management Act last for only 9 years, we have to retender our contracts every 9 or so years. However, a number of the underlying fundamental assets that enable us to deliver public transport have a useful economic life of much more than 9 years. So we pay for these assets through our contracts, through our OPEX, and where operators change through tendering processes, we repay for those assets through our contracts. So it doesn't provide for good value for money in the long term. So the Land Transport Management Act was changed in 2023 to enable public transport authorities to have more control over some of these key strategic assets. Council have been through a number of conversations on this topic over the last 18 months, approved an asset control strategy in August this year, and we have been pursuing a number of activities to help us understand the opportunity and to shape that opportunity to bring to you in the new year how we might better invest our money and better partner with the private sector to enable a long-term value for money outcome for these assets and to de-risk their potential unavailability to us through contract or land ownership changes. I'm not going to say too much more about that. It's just to give you a heads up that there's stuff coming in this area. Might just slip over this slide and crack into the budgets. Okay, so we're going to talk about three things that directly relate to Year 3 annual plan. The first one relates to the funding of improvements for routes 1 and 5 as part of our approved PT Futures program. Then we're going to talk about changes in road user charges and how that affects our budgets. And finally, have a conversation around what's happening in Rolleston in relation to services from Rolleston to the city. So in the long-term plan, Council approved our local share for uplifting the frequency of services on routes 1 and 5 as part of our foundational plank within the PT Futures. They also approved funding to upgrade Route 7 out to Hallswell. Through the National Land Transport Fund, government funded the Route 7 uplift, and that's been implemented and is going very, very well, but did not fund their share of routes 1 and 5. So because we don't have the central government share, we're proposing that we need to take our local share out of the Year 3 budget because we have no matched funding to invest. And we would need to wait till the next NLTB round to bid for that. So the consequences of that is you'd see a reduction in the rating for Year 3. However, if government does provide their share in the next NLTP, we will then need to put that back in, probably in Year 2 of the LTP. As Joel said, we won't know until partway through Year 1, so that's a bit risky. And this may impact your decisions for future rating in the next funding round.
Joe? And then Claire.
Great, thank you. So this LTP, we had the 3 routes in mind for the 10-minute frequency. They funded one of them. So, okay. Just in terms of can we just talk about the 7 for a second in terms of the results? What have been the patronage results? Have we seen, what kind of increase have we seen?
I don't have the specific numbers to hand, but I can say that Route 7 is the strongest growing route on our network at the moment. If I look at July, August, September, I have seen circa 7% growth on that route, circa. We'll have to come back to you with the detailed numbers, but it is going very well. Compared to some of our other routes that have had modest growth or patronage reduction, as we mentioned before, around the fares uplift. So what's interesting to note with Route 7 is even though we've increased our fares, we've seen growth, healthy growth on that route, driven by increased frequency and amenity.
These are the kind of things that I want to see publicised.
Yeah.
Because that's part of the evidence case that we need to be building to say this works. And then if we're socialising that with the world, it makes it really difficult for the government when we do put our investment cases forward to say, oh yeah, nah, because we've already got the public on board with the strategy that we have. So if we can get those numbers and do something around that, I think it would be really good. Yeah, sorry, I just had to butt in, but we'll go Joe and then
Perhaps you could share the stream to your followers, Dale.
Oh, absolutely.
So
when I can find a time in the day at the moment to do these things, I will.
Supplementary. So we can safely assume that uplift is having a positive impact on our private ratio, our revenue ratio.
We can safely assume that it's definitely positively contributing to meeting our target and offsetting any losses that we're seeing in other parts of the network.
Supplementary. So have any conversations been had by the team around looking at picking one of these off locally. So instead of funding for both of them, saying actually, might we look at locally funding the 5 uplift, and the impact of that in terms of the signals to the government that we're taking this very seriously. We have it in our long-term plan. Have those conversations been had, or no? Okay. I mean, that is definitely one for council. I can imagine, there'd be definitely different views on that, but it's something we may consider. I definitely don't have a view on that, but it should be thought about.
Sorry, Jesse, you had a comment, and I think Giles did as well.
I was only going to mention, sorry, just as we move into submissions on the GPS next year as well, highlighting the key achievements that we've been making in the public transport space to justify having public transport more highlighted or PT Futures and MRT highlighted in the GPS, basically, so we can get that funding stream coming down through. So, yeah.
Excellent. I do it multiple times.
NZTA recognised the success of Route 7. It is about funding availability. Agree with what Stuart said. I think the slight nuance to it is that the conversations have been that if we did want to fund something locally, then in effect that commits us to funding it in perpetuity. If the government never comes to the table, it also starts to set a precedent of, well, if you can do it on your own, you don't need national funding. So fundamentally would shift the balance of who is paying for what. So whilst there's always the opportunity to fund locally, those things need to be thought through in terms of the long-term implications. One thing we have talked to NZTA about is that should, for any reason, some national funding become available in 26-27, we've been really clear that whilst the money may no longer be in our annual plan, we would fund it from reserves before we start making that local rate contribution in future years, so that we're not prejudicing the, well, you haven't got any money in it, so we're not even going to consider it position.
Joe? Sorry, I just missed that, Giles. What would we fund from reserve? Sorry, Giles?
So if in the miraculous situation that we finished the business case for routes 1 and 5, and NZTA went, yep, we're happy to fund it, but we've made the decision not to rate for that in year 3, that we would fund year 3 from reserves so that we can then rate for it in the future.
And that's why you're doing those indicative business cases early.
So just final question on all of this, really. So 3's done, 7's done, 1 and 5 next. When's 8? Is that next LTP? What was the plan for 8?
Yeah, so 8 would be the next 3-year cycle.
Yeah, we'll carry on. Thank you.
Okay, so road user charges. When electric vehicles came into fleets in New Zealand, the government of the day recognised that they needed to incentivise and enable investment in zero emissions fleet to commence the transition, and recognised also the cost impost of EV fleets of the day compared to diesels. And so they provided an exemption from paying road user charges for EV buses as heavy vehicles on our roads. So at the moment, all heavy vehicles pay road user charges, but our electric buses do not. That was due to expire next month. And so in our long-term plan, we had anticipated the need to pay road user charges for our EV fleet from 1 January next year. However, not that long ago, a few months ago, government subsequently decided to extend the exemption for road user charges on EV buses through to June 2027. So what that means is we no longer need to account for paying RUC from January next year, so there's an opportunity to remove that funding from the year 3 annual plan. And so that seems like a good recommendation. Reduces the rates, noting, of course, that funding will be needed to be put back in to account for July 2027 onwards. So that will be another costs that we will have to account for going forward in the next budgeting processes.
I've got Councillor Ward.
Did you not account for that? Sorry, did you not account for that in the past?
When you say in the past,
Like you talked about how you put $1 million forward for next year, but did you not allow for that every year after that?
it would have been in the 10-year LTP footprint, yeah. And noting that the expectation of our fleet, number of EV fleet growing, and the changes to how RUC might be calculated, it's likely that we will need to adjust our budgets, yes. Okay, the last key thing relates to services from Rolleston to the city. We have a direct service from Rolleston to the city that runs at peak times in the morning and the evening, and that service was significantly oversubscribed as a direct result of our flat fare trial. So a lot of engagement from the Selwyn community getting into the city on a direct service, which was really good. However, of course, we were leaving people behind. So because there was no funding to respond to that excess demand through the NLTP, from NZTA, Council made the decision to include in this year's budget and next year's budget additional local funding to 100% fund more capacity for Rolleston to the city services. So we are due to start collecting rates, well, we already are collecting rates from Rolleston for additional services. Very shortly after that decision was made, we were approached by Bentley Services, who expressed an interest in running a private direct service from Rolleston to the city. They had noted the increase in demand from this community and saw an opportunity to deliver a service to respond to that demand under a commercial model. So we have collaborated with them to stand up a 7 to 8 month trial, which started in the 1st of September, where we combined forces to deliver a hybrid model of service with a significantly increased level of capacity and a significantly increased timetable window, starting earlier in the morning in Rolleston and going later out of the CBD back to Rolleston in the afternoon peak. This is a really good example of what a trial can do. It's the first example in New Zealand of combined private and commercial services cohabiting on a scheduled route. On the Bentley bus, they have their own fare system and own fare price, and we operate a combined timetable. Some of the route is hail and ride. There's no bus stops, so it's interesting to trial that. And so it's a really good test of the willingness of the community to pay a higher fare and the window of amenity that the community sees in terms of time. So the trial has been running, as I said, since the beginning of September. I don't have November's numbers, but through to the end of October, we have seen a 28% uplift in patronage out of Rolleston on these direct services. So that's a really encouraging and positive result.
28% increase on all buses or just the Bentley buses?
So 28% increase on the route, and that means that some of our patrons have moved to operate on Bentley to use Bentley services. So we've seen a small reduction or moderate reduction in patronage on our services. We run four of 12 services, and more interest from concession holders to use our service because concessions aren't available on the Bentley service. However, I think it's important to just reflect that the community has seen a significant increase in service, and they have responded to that with a 28% increase in ridership on that service. Now, if we were to fund that ourselves, to get that 28% ridership, it would cost us quite a significant amount of money, and our average fare would suffer quite a lot. So this model at the moment is producing a very cost-effective outcome for the community and for us financially, compared to the alternative of us doing ourselves. However, it is a commercial service. Bentleys have the right and the choice to turn this off any time they like if it's not meeting their commercial aspirations or outcomes. And we have seen a reduction in services for October, removing some trips that people just weren't riding and it wasn't economic for Bentleys to operate. That has not seen any negative reaction from the community. They've understood the economics from a commercial perspective, which is good. And so the trial is continuing through till April next year. I would imagine over the Christmas period we might see some adjustments because it's a quiet time for commuters, no school trips, and then come back on in February. We'll watch that and see. But so far we're very happy with how this arrangement is going. The implications for council come if the trial proves at the end to be deemed unsuccessful from Bentley's point of view, they choose not to continue to operate, then we have some choices to either fill that void ourselves through our own funding or return to the level of service that we had. And so this influences what we put in our annual plan for rating in year 3. What we're recommending is that you don't make a decision right now. You wait until we get the outcome of the trial in April next year, and you make a decision in your deliberations process, because you can choose to remove funding or add funding at that point. The funding is already in the draft annual plan, so your decision would be to moderate that in some way, remove it, or adjust it. We feel that we need to let the trial run to get a really good sense of whether that's a thing worth investing in or not.
I've got a few questions here. We've got one from Councillor Robinson, then Councillor McKenzie, then Councillor Sunkel, and then Councillor Campbell.
Oh, thank you. I'm interested in the shift from that of our services on that route to that of Bentley's. I guess the questions I have is that what do you think are the reasons or the influences behind that shift? And could it be, I'm not determining what you're going to say, but I'm just in my head thinking, could it be the fleet of vehicle, or are they like for like, or times of service, or, yeah, I'd like a wee tease out of that, please.
It's definitely times of service. So the service runs earlier, and those earlier times are very suitable for hospital workers because it helps to align with their shift patterns. So that's the primary driver of that.
Stuart, I note that you're going to review the hybrid trial in February, March, but intuitively, is 28% lift in patronage sufficient, do you think, for Bentleys to get a return on their capital? Or their investment?
Yeah, look, we don't have a visibility of their commercial considerations. I think it's probably something that we won't get to see. They are making a decision on their own rights as to whether it's viable or not. They've specifically set a fare that's slightly above ours, because at $3 a ride, they already know that it wouldn't meet their needs. They have expected that we would implement our zone fare adjustment in February, which would see the price go up to $4 a ride, which again helps with their economics. However, given we're not going to do that, that may have an influence on their operation early in the new year. So they will give us an indication of whether it's viable for them to continue, but I don't expect Bentley to give us, and I think it's reasonable for them not to give us insights into the financials of their business.
You haven't got a view as to whether you think the service will be continue or not. And I'd just make the comment where it's probably, I'd make the comment in terms of the debate about whether what we do with the rates takers, that certainly the feedback from campaign meetings, and I see I've got a meeting with Ralston Ratepayers Association, or whatever they call themselves, or Residents Association, next beginning of the new year, I think it is. Feedback seemed to be that they supported a higher fare recovery from those people using the service, or a greater user pays contribution rather than putting it onto rates. And I think the change in mayor in the Selwyn district probably reinforces that attitude.
Councillor Simple.
Just a question: if the Bentley trial does come to a conclusion or an end, is the funding that we have available going to match what was, I guess, being put in place by Bentley, those extra 8 trips, or what might it look like with the funding that we are proposing if we needed to fill that gap? How much of the gap could we fill?
So the funding that we've currently got in our budgets would not replace fully the range of scheduled times that are operated now in the hybrid model. Bentleys are running, let me just count, 8 services in the morning and the evening. We're running 4. In order for us to fund another 8 services, that's a significant cost to us. So the funding we've got available, we would target the times that are most patronised so that folk can still have access to the hospital, etc. But we wouldn't be able to do the full schedule. Yeah,
I've got Councillor Campbell.
I just want to go back to the conversation with Joe, and taking on board everything that you've said about the implications of fully funding ourselves uplift in one of those services. I take all that on board. But I'd actually be really interested in seeing the financial implications, the modelling and the financial implications of that, purely for knowledge and decision making. I think it's kind of yeah, and we don't both live on the 5, okay? But yeah, I'd really like to see any work that's been done on fully funding the uplift in one of those services and see what the implications are.
So just to clarify, so at the moment we've done no work on fully funding. There is work currently underway on a detailed business case for routes 1 and 5, which assumes a shared funding model. So the outcomes of that investment, that joint investment, wouldn't change whether we 100% are funded or not. We'd still see the patronage, and so the challenge for us would be if we fully fund it, we, as Giles pointed out, have to commit to that funding.
I think what we're asking is, I think what's been asked for is that how much would the rates impact be if we fully funded that, based on modelling, if similar to what Route 7's had, that you've had a bit of a patronage uplift on that?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Yeah. Do that work
on the Route 5.
Yeah, on the 5 as well, just because of the amount of feedback we get out west, and also the eastern needs that are coming up at the moment. So I think the 5 would be the more appropriate one.
I think we can provide.
I think you can provide those. Is that not going to take too long to get those?
We can provide those ballpark figures, but I think the one caveat is that councillors will be aware that we are not allowed to purchase any new buses unless they're electric, and therefore it is looking for second-hand diesel. And ultimately, there is a huge shortage of appropriate buses that have to meet the whatever the bus standard is that NZT. So all of any increase in services currently is dependent on us being able to source additional vehicles. So even if the money's available, it's not necessarily that the vehicles are.
So I've got a couple more questions here, do I? How many more slides do we have? One. Okay, so I'll take these couple of questions and then we'll go into the next slide, if that's all good. Yep.
Mine goes back to the Bentley service again. Just with regards to payment for passengers, are they obligated to actually do the whole motu move? Okay. So,
Sorry, I was just going to say it's important to recognise they are an independent private commercial operation. So we have not imposed any obligations on them in that regard. Yeah. So customers pay at the moment via an FPOS machine, and Bentley are developing a payment app to make that whole process faster and easier for their customers.
the reason being is because there's definitely a shortfall in information that we can obtain via that service if we don't implement some of those, I guess, standardised things that we've actually spent a lot of time doing. So it's great service and an idea, but yeah, there must be a mechanism that we can obtain some of that crucial information.
So there is, but it requires us to invest money, and this is the thing. We're completely testing a fully commercial operation, collaborating with us on a subsidised service for a better outcome for the community. Bentley's are sharing with us their patronage numbers by trip, by day, so we're getting access to that information. But if we were to impose on them motu move, then we would be paying for that, and then it would become a subsidised service.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I just thank you very much for this. It's really enjoyable. Just nitty-gritty questions regarding the contracts you have with the bus companies. I did a lot of door knocking. I'm in Christchurch West, and out Yoldhurst Way, they feel, there's Bishopdale that they haven't been so well looked after as far as connectivity and frequency. So to extend the new subdivisions out Yoldhurst, are asking could we get more connectivity out that way. There's one question. I've got another wee question. How adaptive are we in our contracts as far as tweaking routes?
Another fabulous question.
I told you we've got a great council here.
Having a great time today. This is great. And this question is going to warm you up for some conversations we're having next week and then early in the new year. So public transport is run on a zero-based budget model. So money in, money out equals zero. And what that means, we have a fixed number of assets and a fixed number of drivers. But that's what we can buy with the money we've got. And so our network has been planned and delivered based on population, corridors, funding available, and outcomes we saw. And inevitably, as we've talked about before, that requires trade-offs. So some communities have missed out and others have had improved services. If we want to grow our network, then we need to find more funding to invest. We need to buy more buses. We need to get our operators to employ more drivers. So our contracts enable us to expand our network, but the starting point of that is getting funding approval so that we can give them money and they can go and buy buses and employ drivers. The alternative for us is to treat our network a bit like a toy balloon. You make the sausage dogs with a balloon. You squeeze the balloon and it pops out somewhere, it gets squeezed one end and pops out the other end. That's how our network currently functions. We have a fixed number of assets. So if we want to shift assets over here, we've got to take them from somewhere else. So somebody will win and somebody will be disadvantaged. And these are the conversations we're going to bring to you next week and early in the new year, because when we think about in the round, we've got this private revenue pressure, we've got no funding from central government, we've got growth demand in parts of our community, and we've got some of our services that are very, very underutilised and not contributing to our private revenue outcomes. So we are left with some choices of to meet some of our growth demand, we need to reallocate some of our assets. And ordinarily, you would reallocate those assets from services that are performing very poorly to opportunities to get more patronage, more growth, improve private revenue. So that is exactly the conversation we're going to have. Early in the new year, starting in February, our team are working on this right now. We will start a full network service review process. We will be engaging across our community using insights we've already gained from previous engagements, consultations and feedback to shape what the network might look like in the future based on where our community's grown and where our community needs have changed. Now, inevitably, that will produce a plan and a map and routes that require investment. And again, council will have to make trade-offs as to where we prioritise that investment. So using the Yoldhurst one as an example, that is a piece of information that's being fed into our service review process, and we will be engaging with them in the new year to have a quite an open and transparent conversation about choice. If we have routes that go close to those communities right now, so we could shift one of our routes into the new subdivisions that have recently been created, but that means we would shift it away from existing users to new users. So we need to account for those existing users would lose a service and someone else would gain a service. How do we make that trade-off?
Yeah, we're going to have that next week, because that conversation's happening next week. Andrea?
For next time, could you please add the age with the NZ stats, how over 2040, 20% are going to be over 65? Because the way these suburbs in Christchurch are, they were the young families, but now they're all old, and they tend to be in these pockets. What do you know? You know what I mean? So the new subdivisions are the young families, but they work in town. But the other suburbs are made up of a lot of retired people who may not have cars, or maybe they go to a retirement village and they need service. I mean, it's the age piece of the future that they say there's going to be so many of us over 65. 34% in New Zealand over 65 by 2070.
Not me.
I add to that as well. I think the other thing too to be considering is the changes to zoning and land use, and the city's been through plan changes. We've got fast track applications for employment, and there's a lot of other things that come into it as well. So that's all stuff that we and our teams talk about with our partners, in particular at the Greater Christchurch level, about those priority areas and how they're changing and will change over time, so that we can plan for the network. 100%. Yep.
We'll move on to the next slides, and then we'll have a general discussion before we finish.
Okay, so this slide pretty much summarises the net impact of some of the changes that are being put forward for consideration for year 3 of the annual plan, and the impact on rating and the public transport area. So as we can see there, the road user charges has a 0.5% reduction in targeted rates. One of the decisions that council made early this year, driven by the private revenue pressure and the lack of funding from central government, was to pause our investment in our EV fleet growth and transition, so that money can be taken out as well. We've just talked about Route 1 and 5, and we'll do some work on the rating implications if we were to fund that ourselves, so you've got some information on that. We have suggested we exclude the Waimakere and Selwyn direct services uplifts and improvements to the orbiter as well, because there is no NLTF funding for those. Total mobility, you'll see that's an increase.
Why is that increased again?
Yeah.
I'd love to know what the total percentage of rates is on that. But
So that's an increase because demand keeps going up, and therefore our costs keep going up. And until such time as government makes a call on how that might get funded, we either have to keep paying our share, or we choose to change what we contribute.
because that is starting to get quite significant when you start talking about the cumulative increases over the last 4 or 5 years.
So my understanding is that government is actually actively looking at that. What they will be proposing and when they'll be proposing it, I am unclear. But at the moment, basically it is an open checkbook, is whatever the demand is, we need to meet the cost, and the costs continue to run above our budget assumptions, hence the suggestion of including more. But I know the government is actively looking at this area because it impacts on them as well as us.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to butt in on that one. It's probably opened up a can of worms for conversation, but can we just get through that and then hold the
Okay, so
questions to the end?
the third to last line talks about a second ferry. We had been anticipating a change to the inner harbour configuration in Littleton, whereby our berthing location for the ferry would shift further into the inner harbour. And when that eventually happens, if we wanted to retain the level of service to our harbour community, we would need a second ferry. So we had anticipated when we set the LTP a year and a half ago that would happen next year, and that's not going to happen next year, so we could take that money out. And of course, there's a ratepayer gain from the increase in fares that we've just put through, $3 increase, and the zone fares next year, which NZTA, as I said, is going to underwrite. So we don't need to fund as much revenue there. And then lastly, our inflation assumption when we set the LTP was 5%. And so we're adjusting that down to 3%, which is what NZTA Waka Kotahi have in their budgets. And currently we're running just under 3%. So that accounts for that money as well. So we can see a significant reduction in rates out of all of those things put together.
That's it, isn't it?
There's a couple of
right.
summarised slides, but that's probably the most interesting one to focus
Just on the funding changes, just before I open up, the fair price changes in the third party revenue, like from advertising. Is there a breakdown of that? It seems it's all like muddled into the one. Because are we looking at other revenue opportunities as well as the increased fares?
Yes, we are. So we'll shortly be going to market to re-tender our advertising contracts, and with a fair wind, we'll get a good outcome from that. With the fair price changes, obviously that's having a positive impact. As you'll be aware, with Te Kaha coming online in April next year, Council have approved us implementing some shuttle services at a more commercial arrangement. It's not fully commercial, obviously, but to protect our network and improve our private revenue outcomes. And that may well lead to using that as a sort of beachhead on a trial perspective, may lead to us having the opportunity to do more charter-based services and generate more funding that way as well. So there are a number of things that we're looking at. When Motu Move is fully implemented, that creates the opportunity for us to engage with enterprises in Greater Christchurch around a fair share type arrangement where employers subsidise their staff to engage with public transport. And while that is essentially a substitution of money, the intent of it is to drive more ridership, which ultimately grows our revenue. So there are a number of things on our list.
I've got Nick Moody. Okay, any other, Ed McKenzie?
and this doesn't relate to public transport, but it does relate to the transport number rates. At some stage in these workshops, will we discuss the regional transport rate, which applies to people who don't get public transport but are paying for whatever the regional transport rate covers? Because I noted in the last annual plan that actually for rural ratepayers, it's actually probably the average rural ratepayer pays more in regional transport rates than urban people pay in targeted PT transport rates.
So if you looked at the earlier slides, there was on one of the donuts rings, there was a reference to the general rate, which I think is about 8%, is it? 7%? Which is the part of the rates for new councillors that pays for our regional transport functions, which goes across all of Canterbury, rather than just the targeted rates, which is for the PT services. It's all part of the conversation.
Nice to get a breakdown of where that money goes, actually, so that we can perhaps see if there's any opportunity for some rationalisation.
Any other questions? No, I think we've done quite well. So thank you so much for presenting this to us. It's taken the full 2 hours too. So it was a really good discussion and some really good questions from councillors really getting into it. So we'll look forward to the next presentation next week. I think that will be interesting. So thank you very much. We'll break for lunch now. Excellent. So this is our annual plan workshop number 3 of 4. We've got Giles and Grant at the end of the table. This is to provide visibility of the budget impacts and seek guidance on the development of our annual plan. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, save the best till last. Finance, PT followed by finance. Woo, woo, woo. So what we wanted to do today was, particularly for the benefit of new councillors, was to just provide an overview of the kind of where the money comes from and where it goes. And there is some, if I could just, that first section on financial introduction overview, really like to get through that, and then we'll pause for questions if that's okay. And then we've talked a couple of times in the last few days around risk-based assumptions that we include in that annual plan and the long-term plan. So just really giving an overview of those key ones, why they exist and what our current intention is. Before I hand to Grant, I just want to highlight that there are numbers included in here primarily focused on the current financial year. Next week, we have a further briefing with you to kind of bring together the information that you've heard, and you'll see more detailed information on what we currently think 26-27 would look like. So don't obsess too much on the numbers that are in here today. So over to you, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Giles. And yes, don't worry too much about 26-27 because that is next week. And right here, I'll go over the financial overview, which is really 25-26. And the benefit is really for those of you who are quite new to some of the concepts and things. And bear with me if you've been around a fair while and you've seen some of these concepts before. But I think it's handy for those who are new to it. So obviously we've got our finance and planning process and cycle, the LTP over 10 years. We say 10 years, but actually we renew it every 3 years. Yeah, so, and then the annual plan windows within that as well. In terms of the budget, we've got our revenue and expenditure budgets approved to implement the work programs and the activity that we do. And in terms of funding, we've got our revenue and financing policy that specifies the activities, what's funded, and how it can be rated. And then the revision part is exactly that, those windows within the 10-year period. And we're talking about 26-27 as this particular window of interest. Bit of accounting excitement right here. So most of you have probably heard of a P&L or a profit and loss. It has a very long title with us, which is Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expenses. And very simply, that's revenue less expenditure gives the surplus or deficit, preferably a surplus. On the right side, we've got the Statement of Financial Position, aka balance sheet. Assets minus liabilities equals equity or our reserves. We have a large number of reserves at ECAN, and that's because we have funding for specific purposes, and if it's not spent, it goes back to those specific reserves, so it can be managed well in that regard. Down the bottom, we've got an overlay of the different financial years. You'll be familiar with the $12 million surplus for 24-25. We just signed off on that one. The annual plan for this year has a deficit of 3.7. But in reality, we talked about a forecast figure for year end of about 7.3 million as a surplus. So we won't see that deficit, I don't think. Yep.
So just add one comment in terms of the planned deficit for 25-26. Those of you that have looked at our long-term plan and associated annual plans will have seen that there's a deficit in a couple of years, which technically we're not supposed to have. That's as a direct result or primarily driven by the decision about council to fund planning frameworks, which is OPEX expenditure. So it goes through the P&L, but we then fund it through debt to spread the cost over future generations, which therefore results in a deficit in a couple of years. So explainable, but I know that certain councillors, brackets the chair, will want to look at that going forward.
My question, and I put my hand up before I realised that I didn't need to put my hand up. So I've gone a bit blushed in the face here. Are we looking to have a balanced budget for this annual plan?
Yeah, that would be the minimum. At this stage, we're still working this through, so it's early days. But yeah.
So like 26-27, the LTP, we were back in surplus, as in a balanced budget. If you think about the decisions that have been made, not only by government, by this council, to reduce the amount of planning work that's undergoing. So I would confidently forecast a surplus/balanced budget for the next annual plan.
Thank you. That was all.
Yeah, so natural capital, that story's coming up shortly. Stay tuned. Revenue sources. So a variety of revenue sources here. You'll see the donut on the right-hand side. Roughly 60% of our revenue comes from rating of different varieties. So general rates spread over ratepayers and based on capital value. And then targeted rates, as the name suggests, targeted and specific to the type of ratepayer or geographic location. Uniform rates is an interesting one too, a bit like a fixed fee or a flat fee in some ways. And that's divided evenly amongst all ratepayers in a given region. And at the moment, that's about 8% of the general rate amount. And what's interesting about that is it does actually move up in a uniform way, just like the name suggests as well. As the overall rates take goes up, this percentage goes up with it, or down as the case may be. And then we have other sources of revenue, which is grants, user pays, and other. Grants, obviously, largely NZTA with transport. And user pays when you hop on the bus, pay your fare. That's what that is. And consents processing as well. Other revenue, not too much happening there, but there's land, leased income, interest earned from term deposits. They're good examples of other income. If we look at expenditure and what we're doing here, here's our friend natural capital appearing. So we're breaking it down into the key components that make up the profit and loss. So OPEX, that's our day-to-day spend. It'll be consumed fairly quickly in a year. Just pausing there. Do you want to take a question?
Oh, sorry, John. I just had a sort of a slight moment when I saw that second line. But no, carry on, John.
Thank you. Just a question going back to the previous slide in the donut. Can you provide me with a comparative data, say going back 5, 6, 7, 8 years donut, so I can just see the percentage change over time?
We can provide a summary of those sources of funding going back historically. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Councillor Mackay and then Councillor Moody.
Just with regard to the natural capital question, and you just did talk about hopefully being a balanced budget or whatever. If there was to be a budget that looked like that we could do the suggested figure of whatever, less than 3%, and we had some surplus, would we have to go out and consult if we wanted to reduce the requirement on the national capital side of it? Like, in other words, gather some of the planning budget as rates in that year? Would we have to actually go out and consult?
Well, it's currently part of our revenue and financing policy, which I'll come to soon, so it's a key part of that. So that would have to be changed, yeah, in that regard.
It's in the long-term plan time.
Yeah.
So it's a bit yeah.
Tied in.
So tied up. Yeah. Make decisions, when it might be appropriate to actually start collecting to pay back some of that principal, or not to borrow for the year if we could afford to.
My understanding is that we would have to consult on a change to the revenue and financing policy or the Treasury policy. But I think without that, there would be ways that we could manage what I think you're referring to.
Had a Councillor
Let's
Moody.
come back with the right answer, please.
Thank you. Just a general request to take it low and slow. With this briefing, a variety of levels of knowledge in the room, from Councillor Mackay, who's expert and all over it, to us newbies, and yeah, I found it a bit high level so far today and hard to follow. So if you just speak loud and sort of, assume that it's all new, because there's a variety of knowledge levels in the room on different parts of it.
Yeah, I understand. That's new for a lot of people, and it's good to go through these concepts to get an idea for it. And I'd actually suggest that we take questions towards the end as well, Dion, just to help with the flow and not make it difficult for new users as well, or people who are new to it.
Okay, now go through and then we'll come to the end. So if councillors write their questions down, that'd be great.
Yeah, kapai. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about OPEX, natural capital. We've talked about, Giles covered that. It is OPEX funding for planning frameworks for land, soils and water. It's a very interesting one, especially for me coming into and understanding this, and it's a bit different to what I'm used to. It's OPEX spend, but it's debt funded. And the interesting thing is that it can result in a mismatch. So it's expense when these activities, are incurred, but the revenue can be quite drawn out over a 10-year period in terms of the rate funding that comes in. So it can be a bit disjoint in that way. Depreciation, well, that's the value of the asset over its life. We do use straight line as a methodology. So it's an equal division over the life of the asset. And by depreciating the asset, it means that you can replace that asset one day, which is something we typically want to do. Capital expenditure, a little bit different again, and that's on the balance sheet as opposed to the profit and loss. And the expenditure on capital is really about physical aspects, so fleet building, flood protection, and also intangible assets. We don't have much in the way of intangible assets at all. A bit of old software that's been developed. These days it's software as a service, so it's all license-based rather than capitalised. Typically intangibles are things like goodwill, intellectual property, and aspects like that. Not something we typically have. So down the right-hand side you can see the values of those there for 25-26.
I'm sorry, Grant, but I've got one of the councillors at the end of the table who's breaking the rule that we just set and is itching that the
How much of that 11.8 in natural capital did we actually spend?
We'll come back on that.
Yes, we'll come back on that. And perhaps my friends at the back could just do a little check-in on that as well to help. All right, so expenditure, we've got an overlay here by core services, and this ties nicely to the other presentations that you've had on core services. So the biggest spend on core services is actually public transport at 168 million as per this morning's chat. And you can see all the various things that we get up to at ECAN across all of those core services. There's quite a bit of activity there. And at the bottom, you'll see there's organisational enabling costs. And they are the costs of the organisation that gets spread across our core services according to the labour or personnel cost within those core services. That's how we divvy it up. And if you're still feeling a little confused about this one, if you think about front office, middle office, and back office as a way of describing things. So front office would be on the ground delivery for the activity that we do. Back office would be, for example, HR, IT, finance. Middle office are those things that are a little bit closer to on-the-ground delivery. So you might be talking about communications and engagement, strategy and planning. And we allocate middle office and back office across the core services, but there's complicated and difficult methodology around that. But that's just, in a nutshell, how it works. And, it's not a small figure. It's about $100 million of that type of cost that goes across our core services in a large organisation. Correct. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the curiosity is there. Benchmarks, we've got a number of prudence measures here that are in the LTP, and they are mandated in the Local Government Act 2002. And why are they there? Well, they serve as safeguards to ensure the council operates in a financially responsible, but I'd also argue sustainable way. And so there's a range of benchmarks there listed out on the left-hand side, ranging from rates affordability right through to debt servicing benchmark. There's a fantastic one with great use of alliteration, the balanced budget benchmark. It's quite incredible. That's the only one actually that we have a slight technical breach on, because we do have a budgeted deficit this year. But as I say in the forecast, that's not going to eventuate anyway. So it's safe to say that we are well within our benchmark limits, which is a good place to be. And with our benchmark aspects to one side, we also have our financial policies. And we've got 3 of these of significance that relate to what we do in finance. We've got the revenue and financing policy. Quite amazed at how detailed this one actually is when you look at it. It's very, very specific, and there's lots of criteria in terms of the activities we do and how you can rate for those activities. It's very, very specific as to what you can do. And as per the question earlier, natural capital, well, it's in there too, and we'd have to look at the policy in order to make any changes there. We also have the Treasury policy. So that is very much about how we manage our cash on a day-to-day basis. We do have, obviously, debt funding. We've got term deposits. We've got cash in the bank. And it's really important from a Treasury point of view that we have clear rules and guidelines as to how that cash is managed. Because if you don't manage cash well, that can quickly cripple an organisation. So that one is quite important. Helps to have an audit and risk committee too, which we do have, so that's good. Yes, yeah.
So just in the, the context of the Treasury policy and the benchmarks, if you'll be aware that many local authorities are very much at the top of their debt ceilings, borrowing ceilings, which not only makes it incredibly difficult for them to make further and future investment decisions, but also impacts on an annual basis in terms of the interest that they're incurring. So we are in a reasonably healthy position, although it's not inexhaustible, and have to recognise the reasons for holding that headroom are many and varied. I think it's also important to note that as part of the regular reporting to the Audit Committee, we do have external Treasury advisors. It's not an expertise that we hold in-house. Bancorp provide us with advice and guidance on how we should manage borrowings and repayments, depending on how the markets are trending. And at every Audit Committee, they give confirmation or external assurance that we are within the guidelines that Council has set about how much of our borrowing or investment can be fixed rates, variable rates, within certain timeframes of being repaid, etc. So the Audit Committee gets confirmation that we are managing our overall financial position in a prudent and sensible way at every meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Giles. And coming from Wellington, I can vouch for how important that is. The last policy is the engagement, significance and multi-participation policy. And this one is also very important because it defines what is significant, which can be, from what I've seen so far, quite a grey area. And it's a bit of a judgment call, right, to say what's significant and what isn't. And in our case, it's really a matter of those financial aspects and decisions that could lead to something being considered significant and therefore triggering engagement, a certain level of engagement anyway. could potentially go to consultation instead of engagement. So that's the thing. And the last piece is around our delegations. We do have really comprehensive delegations, and there's large documents that deal with all that. And it's not just financial delegations too. It's HR, it's communications, it's legal. It's all of those aspects, all those things you could be doing that could have an impact.
So we just pause there for any questions. I'm also acutely aware that we've run through that quite quickly. It's at quite a high level. There are varying levels of knowledge, expertise, history with this. We do recognise that there may be some benefit in operating some follow-up sessions for individual groups of councillors to ask questions, but we're more than happy to take questions now as well.
Okay, so we've got Ian, then John, Ashley, Nick, Nettles at this stage. And then Sarah.
So I think we're just going back one slide. On essential services benchmark, you say planned capital expenditure on flood protection services should exceed depreciation by 100% on such infrastructure. Can you just, I'm struggling to work out exactly what you're saying there. Are you saying that the planned capital expenditure should exceed depreciation, should match depreciation, or should exceed depreciation by 100% of the value of depreciation? It's just, sorry, it's not clear to me exactly what you mean there.
Yeah, so flood protection services should exceed depreciation by 100% on such infrastructure. So it needs to well exceed depreciation. This is all about replenishment of the assets. And what we see...
Don't need to spend double.
I understand the principle. Yeah. Maintaining the assets and replacing the assets. What I'm not sure is when you say should exceed depreciation by 100%, you mean if you're collecting $1,000 in depreciation, and that accumulates on a particular asset, and then you replace the asset that or is it twice as much as you collected from depreciation?
You're right, Ian. It should be that we are expected to spend at least our depreciation on replenishing the asset. We actually spend more. So thank you for that.
Cool. No, that's right.
So John, you're all good. Councillor Moody.
Just with the really easy questions, hopefully. So yeah, I've worked in a few different sectors and organisations, but remind me, back here at ECAN, our financial year, this that we're talking about now, this will start 1st of July next year? Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Councillor Nettles or Councillor Lamont?
Just around the delegations policies, how much of that is you have to bow to current legislation, and how much flexibility remains in the delegations policy? And thirdly, how often do you revisit it?
So there are certain legislative delegations that are clearly set out that we need to comply with. There are other areas of delegations where we have more discretion, and usually there is either local government or central government guidance on those, which we need to be clear about why we're not following those. This year we have split into two documents. There's the delegations that council holds, and there's the delegations that you have delegated to the chief executive as your employee that she can then delegate to other officers within those. So they have been reviewed this year. I think that is the first time that they've been reviewed since 2018 from memory, and I think our intention would be that those should be reviewed on a more regular basis than that going forward.
Councillor Gerard and then Councillor Campbell.
Sorry, I'm being a bit simplistic here, but I'm just looking at it as a business sort of situation where looking at GST, and obviously it's a tax on a tax for rates, and but what would be the difference in between the tax, the GST that we pay out, and the GST that we can claim?
I'm not sure of the specific amount of the difference between the GST we pay and what we claim, but obviously the net difference is either something we pay to the IRD or we receive a refund, and that's on the balance sheet as well as a payable or a receivable.
Councillor Campbell? Oh, did you want to continue, Sarah?
It's more about, I guess, it's a income that the government is getting off a tax already. So I'm sort of wondering why that. Yeah, it's a bigger question, but why are we getting?
It's one that
why we're paying
LGNZ is very,
GST to
very
the
well
government.
aware of, and they are trying to do some cost share back to local councils around GST, and I imagine that through the amalgamation potential process that might be up for discussion for local councils. Who knows? Ashley.
Could I just confirm that obviously we do comply with all our tax responsibilities, and we also have independent external tax advisors. I believe it's EY, and they provide a report every 12 months to the audit committee confirming our approach, and also do deep dives into areas of concern, either that they've identified or more appropriately where IRD is highlighting that they are going to look at X, Y, or Z, and therefore we need to make sure that we are whiter than white.
Yep.
Just to add to that, I see where you're going in terms of why would ECAM be paying tax, but also good to bear in mind that we don't pay income tax. So that's an example where the public service and local government don't pay income tax. Yeah.
We're going to try and find some information for you, Sarah, that there's from LGNZ around this stuff, and we'll forward that to all councillors. Ashley?
Relating to the revenue and financing policy, you said that it had a very high level of specificity. I'm just wondering how much of that is determined by legislation or government regulation, and how much of it we have determined ourselves.
So the high-level rules or the criteria that need to be taken into account are set out in the legislation, and then council determines how those are applied locally. Whilst the tables are indeed quite detailed and complex, there's actually quite a degree of flexibility of how council can determine. One of the challenges we face with the revenue and financing policy is getting consensus and agreement on what changes or what basis of revenue raising should be applied to different services or different functions. And so at the back end of the last triennium, we did do some work. We could not, whilst there was a recognition that there were areas of the revenue and financing policy that would benefit from updating, it was challenging to get consensus either on what those areas were, but also what those changes might be. And so there was a commitment to have a further conversation with the new council, which we will be having. And there's also been some conversations at the executive team about potentially, rather than looking at the revenue and financing policy as a policy in and of itself, trying to identify those areas of service where the funding regime may benefit from some changes. So you heard Paul and Brett yesterday talking about compliance and consenting, and that has some specific policy statements around the level of user pays. I think from memory between 60 and 80%, which is quite a large range. But if we were to try and move to a different basis for charging user pays, we may need to look at that specific area in terms of how we articulate it in the revenue and financing policy. So rather than driving that work from the policy, drive it backwards from where do we need to make improvements in our business, that needs to be reflected in our policy. We also need to take account of the fact that clearly there is quite a lot of change coming for local government and the RMA reforms, which may mean that we need to think quite carefully about the timing of any work in that space to make sure it remains relevant and applicable in any future scenario.
Nick? Did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Then it's Councillor Robinson, and then we'll try and move on to the next sections.
No, thanks for this. Although it's quite sort of high level, I'm just looking at expenditure and environmental regulation and protection, 133 million. Without digging into detail or anything, I'm just looking at the sort of equitable proportion of user pays versus general rates. And I think that's something we really need to look at in detail on the spend. We could actually save quite a lot by actually putting the onus back onto the user or the means for our compliance. And I really would like to see something brought forward on that detail, because it's a massive save when you actually look at when the general rates covers such big volumes of compliance. We need to look at that.
So, as was highlighted yesterday, that is an area that we know we need to look at. Very conscious that there was quite different views about the balance between user pays and general rates in the last council in consenting and compliance, and equally that 133 million in 25-26 is the amount of money that we spend. How we pay for that can vary: general rates, user pays, other mechanisms. But that's the level of expenditure now. Clearly, if we achieve efficiencies, you would expect to see that potentially come down in terms of being able to operate a more efficient service, potentially having fewer consents, etc., etc. And I'm sure that the RMA changes, I expect the RMA changes may impact on that in terms of what we need to do and how much of it we need to do going forward.
We will know in a couple of weeks.
Just for everyone, I'm on the policy, the summary. It is prescriptive. It's page 12 and 13, and it tells you exactly everything that we do and what percentage and how it comes out. Is it user pays? Is it general rates? So it's a good breakdown for us newbies to have a look at page 12 and 13 of the policy, the revenue and financing policy, which is on our website, right?
It's on the SharePoint. Yeah. Carry on. We'll go through the next few sections.
Councillors also,
when you're ready to stop for some questions, you'll
need to be aware that the policies set the limit, set the ranges, or set the. In previous years, there have been examples where we have not met those ranges. So while there certainly are policies that we want to achieve, they're not necessarily. There's no penalty for not complying with your own policy, although clearly it's not a great look. So a great example of that is in the previous long-term plan, the benchmark around rate rises was maximum of 5%. Council did not approve rate rises below 5% in any of the 3 years that LTP was current for. But the benchmark was still there. We now have a benchmark of 10%. Expectation is that we will comply with that. But
yeah, carry on.
Keep trucking. Yep, we'll keep going. Now we're getting into the organisational level assumptions for the draft annual plan. And so we talked about risk-based budget assumptions as an intro, but the first thing is, what are they? Now, risk-based assumptions are very important because they help us build in for uncertainty and variability and make sure that we're aware of our risk appetite, because it does actually affect budget outcomes. If we don't get this right, we could be under budget, we could be over budget. We do our best to estimate before the year starts to get it right, basically. And there's a number of key assumptions that we work with, and you see them listed up there. We've got interest rates, which go up and down. Luckily going down at the moment. If you've got a mortgage, that's good news. But also good news for our debt, as we're paying less in interest. And then you've got inflationary impacts with OPEX and CAPEX moving in one way or another. And our staff vacancy factor, which we'll come to in the next slide, which is really all about staff turnover and making an allowance within our personnel budget for that turnover and the time it takes to recruit people. And some roles take 3 to 6 months to recruit. And then the last section is about, why do they matter? Well, they matter because we have to build them in to make our budget as robust as we can, and to try and avoid those budget variances that require explanations, and ideally to not have surprises, because we've already factored it in as best we could. This slide's an interesting one because it does give you all of these risk-based assumptions listed out, as well as what we're proposing for the 26-27 annual plan on the left side there. And on the right of that, the 25-26 annual plan percentages that we have now. And on the far right, we've included a number down there for every row to show you what the impact is if you move that risk-based assumption by simply 1%. So it's in the hundreds of thousands as you adjust those percentages. And the inflationary ones with the little asterisks beside them for CapEx and OpEx, they actually come from Burl, from the adjustment indices. So we do have a formal basis for those. Staff vacancy factor is set at 7% this year and proposed the same for next year. And the 3% for public transport comes from NZTA, their specific approved funding rate. So that's like for like with what they're saying it should be. And I should pause there because I think this is the key part of this discussion, because it does impact the budget outcomes for the annual plan. And it's important that we're all comfortable with it, or at least have discussion on it.
All good. So I've got the first hand up there was Councillor Lamont, and then I saw Councillor Campbell, Councillor Moody. Any other hands at the stage? Councillor Faulkner.
Great. Risk-based budget assumptions. I assume, but you should never assume, you start from a risk-averse position when you're doing your modelling based on the risk-based assumptions for things, or do you take a midpoint? How do you feel? How do you get the appetite of where you start with this?
Not so much a risk-averse approach to it, because that could possibly be too adverse. So really we're looking to the market and what's happening in the economy. So if you look at the numbers there, they're generally trending down, and that's following what's happening with GDP, the economy, the announcements we're seeing from the Reserve Bank, following that trend and that guidance from Bancorp and Burl, rather than being risk-averse, for the sake of it. We just want to follow the trend.
Councillor Campbell.
I'm aware that I'm about to ask a fairly sensitive question. Staff vacancy factor, given the uncertainty that we've all just been plunged into, is it wise to keep the same staff vacancy factor assumption?
That's a very good question. If I go back 2 years, we had no staff vacancy factor. It was set at 0, in effect, which meant that we were assuming that every position in the council would be filled 100% of the year, which in effect built in an automatic underspend, because inevitably. So as we have sought to mature our financial management practices, we introduced a 5%. And we uplifted it this year and for future years to 7% to reflect a more realistic basis for going. We know we're going to have some turnover. I think we're still feeling our way into what would be inappropriate. I would be reluctant to recommend increasing it at this point in time, given the uncertainty that exists, but recognise that we are currently running ahead of that. Also recognise that the announcements that are being made could potentially alter the recruitment market, but that, as well as making it more difficult for us to recruit permanent staff and therefore potentially increasing the vacancy rate, it could increase the costs of our labour force, because we will have to spend more on fixed-term contracts or on contractors in order to continue to deliver the business and the programmes that we have already committed to. So whilst we can certainly change that number, it is just an assumption, it is just a number. It will just result in a harder set or a smaller budget for us to manage to in a very uncertain climate, or we could reduce it and increase.
Giles, I've asked the CE just to give a few words on this as well, just for an assurance point of view.
Thank you through you, Chair, and thank you for the question. It is an important one. Certainly, in terms of the vacancies, as Giles has spoken about, that has been put in place for very good reason. In terms of the staffing overall, I'm comfortable that where we're sitting is appropriate, and it's appropriate in the context of what council decisions have been in terms of the delivery for our ratepayers and our communities. I appreciate that we've had some additional proposals in the last 48 hours, and I'm also expecting some potential change with the Resource Management Act. I think once we've looked at those and actually see them move from proposals to outcomes, i.e. decisions, which must be implemented through legislation or otherwise, it's at that point. And certainly, councillors, I'll foreshadow to you that I am interested in the timing of these matters because you will have to, and we will have to work with you with regard to a long-term plan. And in that context, timing will matter significantly. So I am keeping a very close watch on this. In terms of the staffing at the moment, I am comfortable and confident we're in the right position.
Thank you, Stephanie. Who was next? I forgot. Sorry, John, and then we'll go to Councillor Moody. Faulkner.
Through you, Chair. I was just making an additional note there. The council's risk appetite. Is there a formal policy framework? And if so, who sets it? And part of that risk appetite has influenced where the council is currently sitting in relation to RMA conversations, because if we have a high level of risk aversion, there's a potential for community costs.
So we do have a risk management framework which sets out an approach to risk appetite. We also recognise that needs to be updated and reviewed, and we are in the process of setting the dates and putting in place the arrangements to review that with council. So there will be a couple of surveys coming out over the next few months, one around strategic risks and one around risk appetite, and the plan is that there will be a workshop with council, the whole of council, on risk appetite, recognising that risk appetite is not a static or a singular statement. Your risk appetite for health and safety may be very different from your risk appetite for, I don't know, developing our land. But we do take account of the generally conservative nature of public organisations. We are dealing with public money, trying to make sure that we set these assumptions in a prudent and conservative with a small c manner, but recognise that these assumptions can be changed by council before you adopt the annual plan / long-term plan.
Councillor Moody. Okay, Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, I'm largely pretty happy with the assumptions that you've got there and the proposed percentages. Just a query around the interest rate one at 4%. We have some idea of what, and I haven't looked up, and if I thought about this, I could have gone back and looked, I suppose. But that 4% is pretty much what we're expecting given our rollover dates and things like that for our borrowings. Is that correct?
That's correct. So it's looking at our full portfolio of lending, which is fixed and floating. So it's that combination, like a weighted view, if you like. Yeah.
So if you've weighted it, what did your floating look like at that stage when you did this figure?
Sorry, the floating, it's quite a mix. I couldn't say exactly what the floating was, unless the team here knows. But
just wondering, given the fact of the Lotus OCR announcement, whether that would be significant, because I think it's about 40% floating. Where's
the mix of our portfolio, I think, is included in the reporting for the audit committee, which will be coming on the 11th of December. Equally, these are the numbers and our assumptions as at today. If by the time it gets to the annual plan in 6 months' time, the economic environment is different and those assumptions should be changed to reflect further advice from Burl or other factors, we would clearly provide different numbers to council and include those in the budget figures.
And while the interest rate did drop, the swap rates went up, so that does have an impact as well. Is there any other questions on this? They're good questions so far, which is great. No, we'll carry on. Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, so the last slide is the next steps. And so we've got 2 more workshops, you'll be pleased to know. Workshop 4 and Workshop 5.
Oh, there's an extra one.
But wait, there's more, Dion. Yeah. So Workshop 4, we've got an overview of the annual plan and the budget approach to engage with the community, which is next week, and we're talking about the 26-27 figures. That's the main thing. We'll present some numbers to you on the 26-27 annual plan. 28 January, we've got the draft annual plan, 26-27 being provided to councillors, and we're looking for feedback by the 5th of February on that one. That's the critical date for that. On the 12th of February, we've got Workshop 5, where we're going to review any of that feedback and those changes with a view to making any final changes. And then on the 25th of February, the draft annual plan will be presented to council for adoption prior to community engagement, the big moment. Yeah. And that's the run through.
That's great. I'm just looking at the dates. So the 28th of January, that will be our first week back, won't it? From the recess, I imagine. We don't have anything in our calendars at the moment, so this is just why I looked at that date. I thought it might have been an extra week, but yeah.
Just a couple of additional comments.
What was that? Sorry,
from me. We've talked about the surplus this year, and obviously if there is a surplus at the end of the year, that will go into reserves. There was conversation yesterday about potentially how we might use any surplus this year. A couple of factors that we'd need to take into account is clearly the ability to actually get money out the door. And in my experience, if you don't make decisions by early in the new year, you're very unlikely to get money out the door by the end of the financial year. We also need to recognise that our current reserves in many instances are below the threshold that council has agreed, including our general reserves. That's why we're replenishing them. And so whilst the money is great, and obviously council can make decisions, it would be inappropriate of me if I didn't suggest that putting them into reserves is actually not a bad place for them to be in terms of future uncertainty, but also ensuring that we have that buffer for any particular shocks and get back to the level that's set out in the policy that council approves. I'd also just want to reiterate the point I made that we're acutely aware that this was a pretty high level, quick overview and probably assumed a level of knowledge that may or may not exist in all councillors around the room. Certainly happy to provide and arrange drop-in sessions, smaller groups, so that we can have a more two-way conversation to understand some of these double entry issues and other such accounting fun.
Awesome, thank you very much. We've got good time. I just wanted to, what's the word I'm looking for here? Confirm the dates on that. So the 28th of January, you will be emailing us out because I don't think councillors are back at that point in time from the recess, so you'll be emailing that out to us so that we can then provide feedback. In amongst all of that, there's a number of moving parts, most likely our rates cap legislation going through the House as well, but none of this legislation will most likely will land in the next annual plan. So will you at that point, when we start to understand maybe the impacts on this council, will there be an update to us as well? I'm just trying to understand the thinking that you're doing around this.
Okay, I'll answer that for you. So originally we had been wanting to have another workshop with councillors on the early February, but I understand the the dates that council's coming back have changed. We don't want to hold off until mid-February to give you a copy of the plan and get feedback at that point in time. It would make it very hard to turn it around for adoption for that council meeting. So what we're proposing is for a workaround is to email the copy to you towards the end of January, get your feedback, and have another workshop in February and see if there is anything that is critical that needs to change. So we're trying to work around with what's going to work for councillors, what works for staff. But we do need to work towards the date of the 25th of February to have it formally adopted by council to go out for community engagement 2 days after that. So timeframes are very, very tight when we come back in the new year.
If there is any significant changes, which we know there's coming in the RMA reform, which they're hoping to have an assent to the House around August, which would be the second month of this new annual plan. Has there been any thought around what impact that may have? Now, I know we've got to work to the current legislation as we've got it now and we've got to continue, but would that have any material impact potentially on the consultation process, or have we been thinking about that at least, just so we can be ready if it needs to be? That's the answer is yes? Okay. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that. Okay, it's just in the back of my mind. That's cool. Questions from anybody else? We've got Councillor Moody and then Councillor Gerard and then Councillor Mackay.
Just to say thanks. I found it at a good level, good pace. I appreciate that it was short, an hour, and therefore time to digest the things. For me as a learner, regular smaller ones are better than one big one. So well done.
Sarah?
Yes, thank you. You'll be around to answer questions, or if you want to come in and have that chat in that week of February.
Yeah, the team and I will be back well before then, so happy to talk numbers and all those good things.
Well, what we can potentially do is work with governance to put 3 or 4 slots in the diary, and if people can self-select that they want to come along and have a group conversation or a chat, we're more than happy to talk accounting.
Councillor Mackay?
Just really, thanks for the briefing. But for new councillors that want to get a bit more understanding, to look at the long-term plan, which has got all the financial policies and everything in it. And then on the numbers thing, you can have a look at the annual plan, but go to the long-term plan for all the financial stuff.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? We were just having a debate. We're just having a bit of a debate about timing of things. We're just there's a few things that just the pennies have just dropped in my head around timings of things, and it is going to be quite an interesting period that we're about to enter into. So, thank you very much for all of the preparation that you are doing on this and all the work that you're doing. I think that's us. Who started the day with the karakia? It was Peter. Who wants to finish one? I'll have to get my book out. I'll close off with a karakia. I just don't want to get the words wrong, so I've got it out here. So unuhia, ki te uru tapu nui o tāne, ke wātea, ke mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairawa e te arataka tū. Koiara e rongo, whakakairea ake te ki runga, kia tina, tina, humie, huie, taia ki e.